We are indeed honored to have on our program one of the nation's leading authorities on energy and the environment, Dr. Barry Commoner of Washington University at St. Louis. He is the author of The Closing Circle, which brought him international fame and recognition. He is a native of New York City, an honors graduate in zoology from Columbia College. He has a master and PhD degrees in biology from Harvard. Dr. Commoner is engaged in a number of important research projects, including origins and significance of alterations in the environment, especially in relation to modern technology and ranging to the chemical basis of inheritance. He is currently developing a major research project dealing with energy requirements of agriculture, a project of special significance to the Farmers Union. He has received many honors, awards, and he serves on numerous committees and boards of directors of organizations whose purpose include preservation of safety and sanity of the world in which we live. He is a stimulating inquirer into the causes and effects of modern technology. We are delighted indeed to welcome him to our convention to discuss energy and whatever else he thinks is important at this moment in history. Dr. Barry Commoner.
Thank you, Tony. As a scientist, I'm glad to be here because it seems to me that the condition of the farming community is very much related to the problems that have resulted in this country from the advancement of science. What I want to say is this: there's something wrong in the country today. I think that's perfectly clear, to use a well-known phrase. In St. Louis, you can get all the gas you want, but my friends in Massachusetts have to spend 3 hours a week on a line trying to get gas. Now, there can't be that much of a shortage that it would be impossible to move gasoline from the Midwest, let's say, to the East Coast. The best way I know about expressing the kind of problem is a neighbor of mine. Tony forgot to say that I'm a farmer. We have a farm in the Ozarks. And I went down there. There was a neighbor of mine cutting wood, stacking it up high. And I asked him, what happened to your propane supply? Because I knew he heated his home on bottled gas. And he said to me, oh, he's getting his propane allotment all right, but how can he afford to buy it when it's 3 times the price it was last year? And so he got a permit from the Clark National Forest to go out and cut wood and heat his home just like good King Wenceslas. And this is in the United States of today, the wealthiest, most technologically advanced country in the history of the world. And a man has to go out and cut wood to keep his family warm. Why? Because the price of propane has gone up. And there's something wrong. There is something very wrong when you people know that you've got to plan your planting now, not knowing whether the propane will be there exactly at the right week next fall to dry your crop, otherwise it rots. When farmers in Illinois are paying 4, 5, 6 times the price they paid for nitrogen fertilizer, and they're trying to figure out now what's going to happen. These are problems which I think tell us that there is something wrong in the way in which this country is using its resources to produce the goods that we need. And I want to share with you, as briefly as I can, some ideas about what has gone wrong, how it's affecting the farmers and the rest of the country, and what we need to do about it. Let me say first that when you think about the environment, about the way in which animals depend on plants and plants depend on animals, you get a very good insight into the problems of the country. One of the basic ideas of the science of the environment, ecology, is that everything is connected to everything else. You can't disrupt the cycle in the soil without affecting everything that happens. Well, there's a similar cycle in the country as a whole. Everything that we can do in the country depends on the goods, the wealth that can be gotten out of the soil. And it is the farmer who accumulates that wealth, the food, the fiber, and makes it available for the country as a whole. And so, as you well know, the people who live in the cities depend on the farms for producing those goods. But at the same time, you depend on industry and what happens in the city for what? Well, you need fuel, transportation, fertilizer, other chemicals. You have to have these goods. And what I want to talk about is this cycle of interconnection. What the farmer does for the rest of the country and what the rest of the country is doing for the farmers. Because obviously, this cycle has to keep going or everything in the country will break down. And the message that I'm going to bring you, and the rest of the time I'll take to support it with evidence, is that in my opinion, the farmers have been doing their part and keeping their half of the cycle going, but the rest of the cycle is being broken down by the selfish behavior of big industry, which is more interested in profits than doing its job. Now, I'm a scientist, and I've just given you a conclusion. And so it's up to me to support that conclusion, or I'll get clobbered during the press conference, and I'll support it. The conclusion I want to show you the evidence for it, is that in crucial areas, particularly transportation and energy, what is happening in this country is that those industries that are responsible for providing energy and providing transportation are not doing their job. And I'll try to explain why. Let's take transportation. Most of the transportation on the land, and that's what we're mostly involved with, very few people fly in airplanes, let's face it. Most of the transportation on the land is carried out by trucks, cars, and railroads. Now, what's been happening in the country? Well, you know very well that the railroads are going to pot, and the freight is still being carried. Well, what's happening is that the freight is being carried more and more by trucks, more and more by private cars for passenger, and less by railroads. All right. Now, what is it that drives these things? Well, it takes energy. Let's ask the very simple question. How much energy are we spending in order to carry freight? Well, I can tell you this, that for every ton-mile that a truck carries, an intercity truck carries, it burns 6 times more fuel than a railroad train carrying the same amount of freight. In other words, we are moving freight off railroads onto trucks at the expense of a 6-fold worsening in the efficiency with which fuel is used. And this is an overall trend since World War II. At the same time, land is being gobbled up in order to carry those trucks and to make the highways. Let me give you a figure. It takes 7 times more land for a truck to have the roadway than it does for a railroad. I'll give you, an accurate scientific figure. Trucks use 34 square miles of highway, of right-of-way, for every 1 billion ton miles that they carry. Railroads use 4.7 square miles for every ton mile that they carry. What I'm telling you is that to carry the same amount of freight, trucks are eating up the land much faster than railroads will. It takes energy to build the road and the railroad. It takes 4 times as much energy to make the cement and so on, to lay down a road that a truck can go on, than it does to make the railroad. And what I'm saying then is that trucks are not an effective way to do what you want, which is move freight. Railroads are, but the railroads are decaying. Take, for example, what's happening in the Northeast. As you know, a bill has just been passed which will reorganize the bankrupt railroads. And what do they propose to do? They propose to do to the Northeast railroads what has been done quietly to your railroads, namely chop off the branches. The branches that are unprofitable for the railroad, but which you need in order to ship your grain. The bill that's been passed to reorganize the Northeast railroads will shift 20% of the freight now carried on those railroads to trucks. Why? Because the bill requires them to cut off the unprofitable branch lines so that a profitable core is left, and then some kind entrepreneur, some kind businessman will raise his hand and say, okay, I'll buy it, because it makes a profit. In other words, they are going to make the system profitable. It now loses money. It's bankrupt. Making it profitable will cost the country 420 million gallons of gasoline a year extra to carry the same amount of freight. It will increase the total use of fuel for transportation in the United States by 3.5%. It'll put 80,000 tons of air pollution into the air from that extra fuel. And this is being done precisely at the time when Mr. Nixon is calling on us to save energy. In other words, this bill wastes energy. On top of it, the trucks are going to be barging through the streets of towns. You know, when you begin to carry material to the nearest highway, you have to go through towns. Rural towns in this country are going to have their streets smashed. Kids will be at hazard from the trucks. All this in the name of what? And if you look at the bill carefully, you'll find that the bill is designed to do all this in order to prevent the nationalization of the U.S. railroad. This all comes out in the first paragraph of the bill. It says nationalization is not warranted. That's very interesting. That's a dirty word, but let's look at it. The reason given is that nationalized railroads, they say, and most of the railroads of the world, you know, are nationalized, lose money, and it's a fact. Well, you look up the figures and you find out why they lose money. Let me give you a couple of figures comparing U.S. railroads, what they do, with railroads in Europe, which are all nationalized. Now, you know that passenger traffic is a very valuable thing, too. It takes 5 times more energy to carry a person a mile by automobile passenger car than it does by railroad. And as people have suddenly discovered, it's much better to ride on a railroad if you can get into a car. I saw a television broadcast the other day of people in Illinois going home for the weekend, kids going from college to the weekend, in a baggage car, in a freight car. As someone said at the table today, they haven't got the freight cars to ship grain, but they can ship people in them. Well, let's compare the railroads. Passenger traffic on the nationalized railroad, the European railroad, which carries the least amount of traffic, passenger traffic, is 25%. In other words, 25% of the revenues, this is the German railroads, comes from passenger traffic. The Japanese railroad gets 80% of its revenue from passenger traffic. In other words, they can carry passengers. In the United States, less than 3% of the revenues of the railroads come from passenger traffic. And as you know, the railroads have deliberately stopped carrying passengers. And you might say, well, better for them to carry freight. But of course, what they're doing is carrying less and less freight. I talked to a young man just 2 days ago who works on a branch line of the Boston and Maine. And he tells me that they are telling
their customers.
That they are simply going to cut back on them. And of course, they've told you that too. Why? And now you have to look at the finances of American railroads. It turns out that American railroads can't make enough money to make it worthwhile to do their business. And let me